Okay, welcome to another episode of Lifting and Yapping. I'm going to build up to a heavy clean and jerk single, and then the theme of today's discussion is going to be the anti-fragile philosophy. It's become really popular to discuss this concept of being anti-fragile, and I think there's a lot of people with just this surface level understanding of it, where it's just about, stress can potentially be a good thing for the human body, or a new way of thinking about resiliency. What the anti-fragile philosophy is to me, it's an entire framework and a decision-making process for handling complex dynamic systems where outcomes can be quite unpredictable to some extent, and evaluating things like, what is the cost if I'm wrong about this decision? And like I said, for me, especially in the optimal phase of training, where people are getting quite neurotic about certain training decisions, the anti-fragile philosophy always brings me back to home base and simplifies my decision-making process while ensuring that I still get really productive outcomes. So the anti-fragile philosophy was developed by Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb, he's a professor. I guess he lectures in academia on topics such as probability. He's also a hedge fund manager and just generally a really successful investor. And the whole premise of the anti-fragile philosophy is just this idea that complex systems don't require optimization to thrive. They require the right dose of volatility to thrive, and then it's really just about protecting them from threats to the system. Like, rather than thinking about how do I optimize this system, why they say it's impossible to make the perfect intervention with any complex dynamic system is we can't predict the outcomes. We're always dealing with this degree of uncertainty. So where does the degree of uncertainty come from when handling complex dynamic systems? There's always so many variables dictating the outcomes of any given situation, whether it's a human body or whether it's an economy. Both of these are examples of complex dynamic systems made up of systems. And yeah, we can make some assumptions about the interplay of all these factors, but at the end of the day, the outcomes are going to be unpredictable to some extent. And what do I mean by that? So it's not complete uncertainty. It's like, I know that squats are good for building leg strength, but I don't know the perfect dose. I don't know when you're going to hit a PR. I don't know how big that PR is going to be. So we are always dealing with degrees of uncertainty in the fitness industry and in economics as well. Like I said, any field where you're handling a complex dynamic system, there's going to be degrees of uncertainty. So shifting away from this idea of gaslighting yourself into thinking that there's an optimal intervention, because this is something that used to keep me up at night, and I'm sure a lot of coaches will relate to this, because this is why I've been such a critic of this whole optimal fad in fitness. It's the wrong way of looking at things for complex dynamic systems. And especially if you look at where a lot of the science is telling us to go with our thinking, it is down this route of embracing uncertainty. And I think this is one of Nassim Taleb's central contentions with the data-driven era of economics, much the same way that I have this issue with the data-driven, quote-unquote, evidence-based era of fitness, is that people have so much historical data and bodies of evidence to draw on that it fills them with this overconfidence that they actually can make the perfect decision, that they can predict these outcomes. Whereas when you look a little bit deeper into things like, again, dynamic systems theory, looking at what a human actually is, we need to embrace this uncertainty, not run away from it. And this is the thing. Obviously, when it comes to marketing and when it comes to sales, we want to be able to guarantee things. We want to be confident when we're selling results to people. But like I said, just if you're honest about things, you have to embrace this uncertainty. Embracing uncertainty without just saying, oh, fuck it, and just going fully into nihilism. It's like things matter, but to what extent and how much are we in control of these outcomes? And again, not stressing over the optimal decision, whereas all we're looking for is good enough decision making. And then where we're going to put most of our efforts is into hedging against threats to the system. So what do I mean by this? Like good enough decision making and then hedging against threats to the system? It means that I don't have to worry about lining the fibers up perfectly or which part of the quad that I'm targeting. I just need leg strengthening exercises and a decent proximity to failure, because again, not training close enough to failure is a threat to the system when it comes to hypertrophy. What are other things that are going to make it impossible for me to succeed in growing bigger quads? Being in a calorie deficit. So again, just thinking about the threats to the system and realizing that the perfect intervention we can't get there on our own as the coach, as the decision maker. The only way we can even in theory get there is by collaborating with the client. But again, that's more from their subjective needs, wants, and perspective rather than this objective optimal prescription. All right, so we bounced around a little bit there. So again, the key themes of the anti-fragile philosophy: when handling complex dynamic systems, there is no optimal intervention. We're looking for good enough decisions, and then we're just hedging against threats to the system. Complex systems don't require optimization to thrive. We've got to expose them to the correct amount of volatility. And so this is the thing, the same way if you just leave a human on the couch, it'll wither and die. If you apply too much stress to a human, it'll wither and die. But if you apply the exact ideal amount of stress, which is hard to predict and it is an experiment, the system will thrive. And Nassim had this line of thinking when it comes to capitalist economies. He felt like certain economic interventions were shielding the economy from too much stress and not allowing it to self-correct and develop these economic calluses. So again, the way that Nassim Taleb looks at making economic decisions is the exact way that we should be looking at a decision-making process when it comes to dealing with the training of humans. It's so interesting to me that like there's so many parallels between these things. When I was in year 11 and started focusing on studying economics in high school, this was on the precipice of the 2008 global financial meltdown, and there was so much talk about what the effect would be of a certain stimulus package on the Australian economy. And again, Mr. Smith, my economics teacher, would be like, there's no such thing as the rational economic man. You can try to predict how people will spend money when you give the economy a stimulus package. You're like, all right, people are broke. Hopefully they will either save this money for a rainy day, or they will use it to pay off their mortgage, or they'll spend it on food and essentials and things like that. But then people act crazy and they're irrational when they're under stress. So, you give out a big stimulus package to the economy and most of it gets spent on booze and cigarettes because people just want a durry and a drink while they watch the world burn down. And humans are the same. So you can sit there and you can lecture your client about fiber orientation and moment arms and things like that. But if they just have an emotional attachment to some exercise, you want to find ways to let them lean into that. Like, don't worry about, this exercise that they've got some weird, irrational, emotional attachment to. Is it a good enough quad exercise? Then sweet, because if it falls within the bandwidth of good enough for us, and then they think it's perfect, then that's how we get to the actual optimal decision there. Because this is the thing that humans do in the evidence-based era. We gaslight ourselves into thinking that we're not highly emotional creatures, when all the science and all the emerging frameworks and all the modern views of what a human is telling you to embrace this stuff. And again, I think the rehab professionals are doing a good job of this. I think performance coaches, it's sort of, some of us are talking about it. I'm talking about it a lot. Also, shout out to Jamie Smith, he talks about it a lot. So going back to this theme of, trying to convince yourself you're not this highly emotionally driven animal, one of the themes that I think is really important in fitness is trying to balance the objective and the subjective. We always give this lip service to the art and science of coaching, but I think people struggle to explain it outside of sometimes I just do a bit of fucking whatever when I don't have a good answer to the problem. Whereas what the art and science of coaching is to me, especially with this perspective that the anti-fragile philosophy grants me, is that I use science, data, just all the objective sort of side of things to determine my bandwidth of good enough. So I'm not looking to research to find the perfect quad exercise because I have this worldview that it's fundamentally impossible to determine the best quad exercise or the best chest exercise at a population level. I do believe that all these studies and these scientific principles can give us our bandwidth of good enough quad exercises, of good enough chest exercises. And then again, like how I find the optimal one is by meeting the subjective needs of my client where they're at. So I will show them the bandwidth of good enough, and then how we find optimal, and this is the art of coaching, is through their subjective wants and needs and whatever stories I can sort of pitch them about exercises that I want to convince them are worthwhile. But again, it's not the objectivity, it's not the data that's going to help me convince my client that this exercise is a better choice. It's the story that I attach to it. And I think that's one of the things where a lot of like logically minded or self-identifying, extraordinarily rational people got into this field, and that's not really exciting to them, like this idea that the client actually does know best. But yeah, that's this old world view of a coach, that you're this all-knowing guru that can just dictate the perfect plan to your client. A lot of these modern frameworks are sort of showing us that a collaborative approach is the most evidence-based and the most truly effective approach to meet the client where they're at. And like I said, to me, that's the art and science of coaching. And fuck, I swear there's not many people in this field that have the balls to say what they actually mean when they're like, the art and science of coaching. Like I said, it usually just means I do a bit of fucking whatever when I can't solve the problem. Whereas, yeah, that's exactly what the art and science of coaching is to me. Music just, power outage. The other thing that's really interesting about this Nassim Taleb bloke and his Antifragile Philosophy is, not only is he really good mates with Mark Rippetoe, which is just funny, like they hang out. The idea that Nassim Taleb and Mark Rippetoe go on cute drives together on the weekend, I love that. One of Nassim Taleb's primary investment strategies is actually called the Barbell Strategy. And it's this Barbell Strategy that has led to me having a much more GPP approach when training quite specific athletes. So the Barbell Strategy is a huge influence on why I'm keen on powerlifters doing light or extensive plyometrics, or why I like them to do cardio as well. So what the Barbell Strategy is explicitly as an investment strategy is, Nassim Taleb, when he's investing his own or other people's money, he'll put 90% of it into blue chip stocks. So things that aren't going to make you rich overnight, but things that have a pretty high guarantee of success, investing in things like banks, really well-established companies, resources and things like that. Things that are just generally more stable. Things, like I said, they won't make you rich overnight, but they'll pay off through the compounding interest. Just years and years and years of making incremental gains. And then with the remaining 10%, he will invest it in extraordinarily volatile or risky assets. And these are things that could go to the moon overnight, 1,000, 10x, or they could just completely go to zero at a moment's notice. But the thing is, it's a really advantageous position because he's not relying on these crazy investments to actually pay off. It is a genuine gamble, but then the downsides are mitigated because he's only risking a very small portion of his portfolio for a huge potential upside. And that's the way I look at dosing zone 2 cardio to a powerlifter or extensive plyometrics. Is that going to get him to squat a national record directly? No, but what's the risk of adding in zone 2? There's not really many recovery demands that you're increasing there. And the huge potential upside is your athlete just being a healthier person, which anyone who's worked with powerlifters before, some of them just don't take care of their health enough. They're always getting sick. That's what gets in the way of training. And same with the plyometrics. It's like, extensive plyometrics going to be the reason why my powerlifter squats a national record? No, but it might improve their overall tendon health. It's not a genuine threat to the system because the dose is small and we're not pushing the intensity that much, and it could improve their tendon health so that they can train their legs or train their squats harder through the back end of their prep. So that's sort of how I adapt the barbell strategy, which is funny that it was developed as purely an investment strategy, but then it can be adapted to training quite easily, like a lot of these economic principles and concepts. Like I said, if you want to get your nose ahead of your peers in the fitness industry, get your head out of the fitness industry. There have been fields that have been handling the objective and the subjective, that have been handling the art and the science of handling and decision making for complex dynamic systems. As soon as you just look outside of the fitness industry, you'll be decades, maybe even centuries ahead of your peers. Fuck optimal. If you want to make sick content, go download the ebook. If you want to train like me, go get yourself a 7-day trial of general physical preparation. And don't forget to subscribe and like if you like the video. See you next time. If I do this, please buy the book. All right, you win some, you lose some. That's the anti-fragile way. I'll see you next week.